here's my question to you, okay? And I would love some response. Okay, here we go. Have you ever been unexpectedly moved to tears? Anybody? Unexpectedly moved to tears? Disney movies do this to me all the time, okay? I feel like Disney movies do this intentionally. Like, they take you on this emotional roller coaster. I think one of the best examples of this is The Lion King. How many Lion King fans do we have? All right, so I have a daughter, and my daughter and I were watching The Lion King a couple years ago, and she's enjoying all the songs, she's singing, she's dancing, and then Mufasa dies. And then she can't stop crying, and I can't stop crying. It's crazy. But there's one Disney movie that I just cry like a baby every single time. It's the movie Up. Have you guys seen this movie? Okay, let me tell you the first time I saw it, because it's a whole situation. Okay, here we go. So a bunch of my college friends and I drove up to Orlando. My friend Ryan was having a party. He worked at Apple, and Apple just released something called the Apple TV. Anybody have an Apple TV? Okay, now this is like 15 years ago, okay? I know I'm an old dude, but listen, hang with me. This is like the first generation Apple TV. The thought of downloading a movie was like, what, you could do that, right? So Iron Man just came out, so we thought, hey, let's go over to Ryan's house, let's break in his Apple TV, and let's watch Iron Man. Well, the problem is internet speed back then wasn't as fast as it is today, so downloading a movie didn't take minutes, it took hours, okay? So he said it like the day earlier to download Iron Man. We show up, there's pizza, there's wings, there's a whole party, but Iron Man has not finished downloading, and it wouldn't let you play until it was done. So we decided, hey, let's just kill some time. Let's watch the movie that he already had downloaded, the movie Up. So I just want you to picture this for a minute. It was a bunch of grown men, okay, in a living room filled with pizza and wings, expecting to watch an action movie, and instead we watched the first 5 minutes of Up. Now, if you've watched Up, you know the first 5 minutes are not just normal 5 minutes. I mean, it's the saddest story of all time. I mean, you watch a couple get married, and they just have so much vision for their life, and then they struggle with infertility and depression, and then the wife dies right as they're about to go on this giant trip. It's like the trip of their dreams, and it's just this sad moment. And so everybody in this living room are bawling their eyes out. I mean, everybody. And then Iron Man downloaded, we watched it, and it was great. But, like, I was not the same, okay? I actually had to leave the movie and call my wife and tell her, like, I love you, you know, anyway. But sometimes we're moved unexpectedly to tears. You might be wondering, like, what do sad Disney movies have to do with the Bible? That's a great question. But we're going to look in the Gospel of Matthew, in Matthew chapter 9, and in there, Jesus sees something that moves him to tears, moves his heart. In fact, something happens, what he sees stirs in him something so deep that something had to be done. And this happens to us all the time. We can come face to face with something that just moves us in a way that brings us towards action. Matthew chapter 9. Here we go. Here's what we see. It says this: Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. Okay, every disease and sickness. So I need some help on this one. What city do you live in? Anyone wants to tell me what city they live in? What city? I got Hollywood. Oh, I lived in Hollywood for like a decade. Hollywood is awesome. Who else? Tamarack. Okay, what else? Lauderhill, I heard Palm Beach. Wow, you drove far. Okay, what's your favorite thing about your city? Anyone want to tell me your favorite thing about your city? There's bowling? I'm terrible at bowling. Are you good at bowling? I wish I was better at bowling. Yeah? That's pretty cool. I'm from Pompano Beach. How many of you from Pompano? That's what's up. So I grew up in Pompano Beach. My parents grew up in Pompano Beach. I went to school in Pompano. Every week, I would eat at Wings and Things and Jack's Hamburgers. If you know, you know. All right. Dandy Donuts is in Pompano, right? How many love donuts? Nothing better than some fried dough. I'm telling you, this is all connected to the Bible, I promise, okay? So Dandy Donuts, okay, and Pompano Beach, like that's what I resonate with the most. Okay, like, and Dandy Donuts isn't just donuts. Like, it's actually a generational heritage in my family. My dad went to Dandy Donuts as a kid. I went to Dandy Donuts as a kid. My kids get to go to Dandy Donuts. Pompano Beach plays a huge role in my story. it says in the text that Jesus was in towns and villages. He was in a region called Galilee. And just like Pompano plays a huge part in my story, and your city probably plays a part in your story as well, Galilee plays a huge part in the story of Jesus. This is the place where he was raised. Nazareth was a town in Galilee, so when it says Jesus of Nazareth, he's actually identifying himself by his community. 11 out of his 12 disciples were from Galilee. Sermon on the Mount preached at Galilee. Most of the women who followed Jesus were from Galilee. Jesus didn't just live in Galilee. This is where he ministered. This was the place that was close to his heart, a place he identified with. And so as he's ministering here, it wasn't a small town. In fact, we're actually told there's 200 plus towns and villages in the region of Galilee. One historian estimates there's 3 million people in Galilee, which is, if you take Broward County and Palm Beach County, combine them together, it's about 3 million people. And so that was the region that Jesus called home. And Jesus would minister there. He would give his life there. He would teach and heal. And so as he was doing this, something happens. In the city that he loved, as he's ministering, something happens. Let's continue. Verse 35. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. So Jesus is in a community that he loves, in a region where he spent his life and most of his time. And what is he doing? He's teaching. He's proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. And God's people have been waiting for God's kingdom. All throughout their history, they have sung songs about God's kingdom. They knew in God's kingdom, there would be wholeness and restoration. There would be peace. Every tear would be wiped away. People would flourish. And so Jesus would begin his ministry by saying, repent, for the kingdom of God is here. The thing you've been waiting for is happening right now. He would heal, and healing is not just healing sickness. Jesus is doing something deeper. He's actually restoring what was broken and damaged by sin and evil. Sickness is a result of the fall, and so Jesus is actually reversing everything wrong with the world when he's healing. So Jesus knew that through him, all dead things would come to new life. And as he's doing this, as he's healing in a town that he knows, in a community that he loves, what happens? People keep coming. People keep coming to him. Crowds start to gather. And as this happens, he looks out. And verse 36 tells us something powerful, something about the heart of Jesus, something that we ought to know. And it says this in verse 36. When he saw the crowds, he had what? Can you say that word out loud? He had what? Compassion. He had compassion. He had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. We think of God, probably think of a lot of things. We think of his power. We think of his wisdom. We think of his knowledge and his strength. But do we think of his compassion? Jesus looks out at all these crowds. What does he see? He sees people who are lost. He sees people who are broken. He sees people who need healing. And it's not his power. It's his compassion that urges him to do something. In fact, the word that's used here for compassion is the strongest word used for pity. It's like a pit in your stomach. Anybody feel that feeling before? It's that feeling of like something just, it's not right. Something has to be done. And that's what Jesus is feeling as he looks out and he sees all these crowds of people that he knows, people that he loves, because this is where he grew up. He knows these people need what only he has. And so he knows something has to be done. So what caused Jesus to feel this way? Lost people, specifically lost people that he knew. He knew these communities. He knew these towns. He knew these cities. So Jesus grew up in this region with people he loved deeply, and as he's looking out, he sees people who are struggling with sickness and sin. He sees people who need healing, that they're just desperate for a touch from God, and his heart is deeply moved. Now, the Gospels tell us about all the things that move the heart of Jesus, all the things that move him to compassion. The first is this: he was moved to compassion by the world's pain. He was moved to compassion for the sick, for the blind. All throughout the Gospels, if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, whenever Jesus comes face to face with somebody who is in pain, what does he want to do? He wants to bring healing. He wants to bring healing. The second thing, he was moved to compassion by the world's grief. By the world's grief. In John 11, a friend of Jesus died. His name is Lazarus. And Lazarus' sister runs after Jesus like, Jesus, we need you to come. Lazarus is sick. Jesus comes, but he doesn't come right away. And when Jesus shows up, Lazarus already passed. And so when Jesus shows up at Lazarus' burial, what he sees moves his heart, moves him to compassion. Just this is what it says here, John 11. So when Jesus saw her weeping, he's talking about Lazarus' sister. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him, he asks. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And then John 11:35, which is the shortest verse in the Bible, it says, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. So what moves Jesus to tears, even though Jesus was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, was the fact that Lazarus' sister was mourning. And a whole community was mourning the loss of their friend. And so Jesus is moved to tears because of their grief. He has compassion. He was moved to compassion by the world's sin. So Jesus, if you read the Gospels, Jesus doesn't minister to the righteous. He goes towards lost people. In fact, actually, he calls out the Pharisees, who were the righteous ones, all the time. Jesus wasn't afraid to go for people who were marginalized, people who were oppressed by moralism or legalism. Jesus wasn't afraid to go with people who were cast aside. He would longed to minister to them because of their sin. For Jesus, it didn't matter who you were, who you are, or where you're from. You're never too far from his love. So he was moved by compassion, by the world's pain, by their grief, by their sin. And lastly, he was moved to compassion by their loneliness. The sight of a leper, in Mark 1, Jesus comes face to face with a leper, which leprosy is a sickness that you'll eventually die from. And in that culture, you were cast aside because they thought that you would cause everybody else to get sick as well. And so he'd be moved to compassion for this person because of how cast aside he was. He was thrown away to die alone. And Jesus would minister to him and bring him back in. He would heal him. And that's what Jesus longs to do with people who are lonely. There's another story in the Gospel of Luke where a widow's only son passed away. Here's what Jesus does. In Luke 7, he says this. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain. And his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. And as he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. And listen to this. Verse 13 says, when the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her. And he said, don't cry. Then he went up and touched the bier, and they were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. He said, young man, I say to you, get up. The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God and said, a great prophet had appeared among us. They said, God has come to help his people. Jesus is moved to compassion by the world's loneliness. Now, if you compare religious leaders of his time to Jesus, when they saw lost people, they saw wildly different things. The religious leaders of their time, when they would see lost people, they would think that they saw people that they felt like lost their value because of how lost they were. But when Jesus saw lost people, he was moved to compassion. His heart went out to them. He wanted them to feel loved and cared for and ministered to. And so if Jesus looks at lost people, and his heart's moved to compassion, what moves your heart? When you think about your own neighborhood and your family or your friends at school, when you look around and what you see in your city, what moves your heart? What moves your heart? Just because God's heart breaks for lost people doesn't mean ours do naturally. We have to have the same vision that Jesus does when he sees lost people. Jesus sees lost people. He doesn't cast them aside. He runs towards them. Pain, grief, sorrow, sin, and loneliness, these aren't things that Jesus just sees in Galilee. These are things Jesus sees everywhere he goes. And these are things that are prevalent in our time as well. And probably in your soul, you probably feel this in your own life at times. Pain, grief, sorrow, sin, loneliness. Loneliness is a slow and silent poison. Over 57% of people feel lonely. I read somewhere that 2/3 of people would say they felt lonely last month. Thanksgiving is an opportunity. Sometimes we think it's going to be full of fun family time and great food and awesome dessert like pumpkin pie. But sometimes Thanksgiving is lonely and sad and heavy. Loneliness affects 57% of people. It's become an epidemic of our time. You know how in our cities we have like mayors and like city commissioners? Well, in England, they actually developed or created a position in their government called the Minister of Loneliness. Let's check this out. This person's sole job is to tackle the sad reality of modern life. That's crazy. Have you ever heard of a movement called No More Lonely Friends? Anybody heard of this? No More Lonely Friends. Okay, so this movement started because some dude was going for a walk in Central Park. And as he's going through a walk in Central Park, he comes across three girls who are talking to each other, and they're talking about how they are basically planning a birthday party on the weekend their friend is out of town intentionally. They are intentionally excluding a friend from their circle. And so this guy was like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. And so what does he do? He goes to TikTok, and he actually uses his 40 followers to try to find this woman named Marissa. Check it out. Look at this video.
I hate to be the one to stick my nose where it doesn't belong, but if your name's Marissa, please listen up. I just walked by your friends, and I need to tell you that the weekend you're away is not the only time that they could do their birthday party. They are choosing to do it the weekend you're away, and you need to know. TikTok, help me find Marissa.
That's crazy. And so through his 40 followers, Marissa was found, everybody. And she broke up with her friends because, they were toxic and bad and evil and all that. And she realized she deserves better friends. And it's pretty hard to find friends. And so what does she do? She actually starts something called No More Lonely Friends. As her story began to go viral, people started reaching out to her, saying like, oh, that happened to me too. That happens to me all the time. No More Lonely Friends started as a movement to help people find community because loneliness is so prevalent in our time. And so when Jesus looks at loneliness, what's happened is his heart's moved to compassion. Another thing to think about is what do we see in our time? We see grief. We see grief. Youth suicide is at an all-time high. Depression has reached new levels. More and more people are dealing with chronic pain from anxiety or stress. Maybe you've had a friendship dissolve and you don't really know why. There's been no closure there. Maybe Thanksgiving was a heavy, heavy day for you. Not a day of joy, but a day of heaviness. Maybe you've had friends who hurt you. Maybe you've lost a loved one from COVID and you're still kind of processing that. Grief in our time just gets more and more and more and more prevalent all around us. Now, in the Gospels, when people are grieving and mourning, what does Jesus do? He draws close to them. His heart goes out to them. His heart's moved with compassion to people who are just struggling to make sense of the world around them. Loneliness, grief, pain, sorrow, whatever it is, these are the things that move the heart of Jesus. So as he's healing, as he's ministering, people are gathering. He sees their sin. He sees their sorrow. He sees their loneliness, and his heart is moved to compassion. Let's continue. Verse 36, he says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. So Jesus likens these lost people to sheep without a shepherd. That's a funny metaphor because if you know anything about sheep are, they're kind of dumb. Okay? They're kind of dumb. Sorry if you are a big PETA fan. Sheep are great. Just kidding. They're kind of dumb. And here's the thing. They're kind of blind. Okay? They can't really see really well. And they will eat their entire food supply. And when that's done, they will eat each other's poop until they die. True story. True story. That's actually a real thing. So sheep need shepherds. Why? Because if not, they can't lead themselves. They can't take care of themselves. So they need people to lead them. They need people to care for them. They need a shepherd to walk through life with them. They will eat and eat and eat until they die, which I actually feel like is a good metaphor for ourselves. Left to yourself, what would you do without the Lord? Like I love to eat healthy. I try to exercise, but I have a nemesis, okay, something that I can't say no to. Something that when I come face to face with either eating healthy or this, I will always choose this. It's cereal, okay? Cereal is great, right? Eating healthy is fun. Salads are cool and all, but man, a bowl of Lucky Charms. Am I right? Come on, somebody. So I do. I love to eat healthy, but sometimes things just grab my attention. And so, like sheep without a shepherd, I'll just always want to follow my own thing and do my own thing. But sheep need somebody to lead them. They need someone to lead them. Let's continue. Verse 36 says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. So the harvest is plentiful. What is he talking about? The harvest represents people who need Jesus. These are the sheep who have no one to lead them. These are the sheep who are lost and will continue to be lost unless somebody reaches out to them. They are the harvest. These people need a new way to live. They need a resurrection. They need a relationship with Jesus. They were spiritually dead but need to be made alive. They were lost but need to be found. Jesus says to his disciples, look all around you. Look at the crowds who gather. Look at everybody who needs healing. Look at all these broken people. Look at the poor and the hungry. Look at the sad and the lonely. Who is going to reach out to them? Who's going to do it? You will. You need to be a worker. You need to be in this field. You need to help reap the harvest. That's what Jesus is calling his disciples to do. He's saying, look all around you. Look at the brokenness. Look at the people lost and confused. They need Jesus. And how will they find Jesus unless someone leads them? And then he says, but the workers are few. But the workers are few. This is a metaphor. I'm not sure if you're a farmer, okay? I'm not sure if you love to go plant trees in your backyard or, plant flowers or whatever. But what happens is someone has to work soil, work a field to get it ready for a harvest. They plant seeds and they make sure there's nutrients in the soil. And as the nutrients are watered and the seeds are watered, the soil becomes fertile and a harvest starts to grow. And there's a crop that must be gathered. And if it doesn't, if no one gathers that crop, what happens? It just kind of sits there, withers away. And so the image here is Jesus saying, look at everyone ready to enter the kingdom. Look how desperate they are for a touch from the Lord. Look how hungry they are to enter into the kingdom. And who is going to lead them in? Who is going to invite them? So I want you to think about the pain that you see in your own life or all around you. Maybe you have a friend who is struggling. Maybe you have a friend who's struggling with loneliness. Maybe you have a friend who is just so lost. That is somebody waiting and ready to enter into the kingdom, to taste and see what God only can bring. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Like sheep without a shepherd, lost people will just continue to wander around in darkness until someone invites them in. So Jesus looks at the people that he loves in the region of Galilee. His heart goes out to them. And when Jesus looks at your city, looks at your school, looks at your friends, your family, his heart goes out to them and says, look at them. Look at those people. They are the harvest. And I just need workers. Who is going to come and bring these people into the kingdom? So you might be hearing this and you might be thinking like, how can I do that? I'm 14. I don't even have a car. How can I join God in his mission? But all throughout the Bible, Jesus shows us that God accomplishes his mission through his people. God gathers a people and mobilizes them and sends them out on mission. His purposes are accomplished through his people, always through his people. And so this is what he invites us to do. He wants to invite us to join him on mission, to join him on mission. He is gathering people. He is bringing them into his kingdom, and he's saying, I need more workers. Will you come and work with me? Will you come and partner with me? God desires to bring resurrection to every part of our world, every part that has been broken and damaged by sin and evil, every tear he wants to wipe away and make new. He wants to bring resurrection to everything that has been broken and damaged by sin, and he invites us to join him in that work. So there are three things I think we can do. If you're looking to join God in his mission, you're looking around and you're thinking like, man, there are people all around me who are far from God, people who need what only Jesus can offer. And you want to join God in that mission, there are three things you can do. It's intercede, invest, and invite. Intercede, invest, and invite. To intercede means to basically just pray for someone. To pray pray for them, to pray that the Lord will bless them, to pray the Lord will heal them, to pray that the Lord will open up opportunities for you to build relationship with them. Who do you know in your life that struggles with loneliness? Who do you know in your life that is just so lost? Who do you know in your life who just needs Jesus? Pray for them. Start praying now. You can intercede on their behalf. Prayer is the greatest tool that Jesus used to change the lives of others. You can start praying for that person now. The second thing is invest. So you can intercede on their behalf, and you can invest. To invest means to basically do what Jesus did. Our passage starts off with Jesus meeting needs. He's healing people who need healing. He's meeting the needs of people who need him. And you can do that too. You can join God in meeting needs, building relationships. Just because you're young doesn't mean you can't do that. Just because you're young doesn't mean you have like Holy Spirit Jr. And the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, the same Spirit lives inside of you. You can do the same work Jesus did. You can meet needs of others. You can show people acts of kindness. You can invite them to join you into something, play a game, invite them over your house, go to a movie, something to build relationships with others. Maybe you have a friend that's living a lifestyle radically far from God. Instead of judging them, instead of pushing them away, lean in, invest in them, build relationships with them. So that you can do this, invite. Intercede, you pray for them. Invest, you can build relationships with them so that you can invite. And invite them just means you're inviting them to Jesus. You're inviting them to respond to the goodness of the Lord. You're inviting them into the kingdom. Jesus says, look, the harvest is plentiful. Look at all the people who need what only the kingdom can bring. You can invite them in to taste and see the goodness of the Lord. Invite them to Jesus. Invite them to your First Priority Club. Invite them to HSM. Invite them to church. Invite them to something. You can build relationships with them for the purpose of inviting them. People don't just randomly show up to Jesus. They need to be invited. They need to be invited. And so Jesus looks at his community. He's healing. All these people are gathering. He's looking all around. And he is moved to compassion by what he sees. He sees their sin. He sees their grief. He sees their loneliness. He sees their pain. And he just longs to bring restoration. He just longs to minister to them. So he sees the harvest and he says, somebody come and help. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Let's pray.